Hello everyone, thank you for joining us wherever you are. I'm Gulo from Jadi PNS, will be your host. Now we are with Vanessa Nakate. She is a climate justice activist, author of A Bigger Picture, and then UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador from Uganda. Hello Vanessa, how are you?
I'm okay, Gulo. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us, and we are really excited to have you here.
Very happy to be here as well.
Thank you, Vanessa. Vanessa, could you please give us a little bit of background on you, please?
Well, I maybe I can give a background of education. I studied business administration at university and I majored in marketing. Well, most of my background is mainly about school. There's nothing much about it except that I went to school and I did business administration. And I live in Uganda with my parents and my siblings. Yeah, it's basically that.
All right, thank you. And I'm wondering when and where were you when you first realized you wanted to fight for climate change?
So in 2018, I did some research about the challenges that were affecting the people in my country, Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I got to learn that climate change was one of those challenges. Because it wasn't the first time that I'd heard about climate change, because I remember, a topic about it in school. But then when I remember studying about it in school, it didn't really give me the urgency of what was happening. It was more of the theory part of it, but one that didn't really create that urgency of the crisis that was impacting the lives of the people. And when I got to learn that it was, one of the challenges affecting people in Uganda, I decided to read more about it, to learn about the causes, to learn about the impacts as well. And in that moment, I realized that some of those impacts actually were already happening in Uganda because we had seen some areas experiencing heavy rainfall, which heavy rainfall led to flooding, landslides in the eastern part of the country, areas of Bududa, areas of Bundibujo, and people were already being impacted by climate change. For me, that was the time I realized that it was happening, it was a crisis, and it's the time I decided to do something about it.
And then how do you see the effects of climate change in your home country, Uganda? Would you like to explain more about it?
Yes, so in Uganda, of course, with the rising global temperatures, there are changes in weather patterns, and these changes lead to, heavy rainfall in short periods of time, and also, long dry spells in certain parts of the country. Like the example I've given, areas in the eastern part of Uganda, also areas in the western part of Uganda, areas of Kasese, we've seen, flooding, landslides, and people's livelihoods being destroyed, people's farms being destroyed. Many people in Uganda, especially in the rural areas, they depend on agriculture for their survival. And when there are these disasters, if there are dry spells or if there are floods, and farms get destroyed, people are impacted, and the access to food, becomes so difficult. Food prices increase. So you realize that, it's something that starts from rising temperatures to changing, weather patterns to, these climate disasters like floods or droughts, which then result into, more problems like food, insecurity, exacerbating poverty, in these places, leading many girls to drop out of school. So it's really like a connection of, different, it's like one thing leading to another. Those are some of the things that I've seen happening in Uganda.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get involved in climate activism?
Yes, so after deciding that I had to do something about it, I joined the Fridays for Future climate strikes that was started by Greta from Sweden. I was inspired to start striking as well, and I remember holding my very first strike with my siblings and also my cousins to raise awareness about the impacts of climate change and also raise awareness about the need for environmental protection. So that was how I got involved. And along the way, I started to go to schools, to speak to students, to carry out a form of climate education. I started to go to communities, working with different activists and organizing, with different groups to raise awareness about, the impact of climate change and what needs to be done. So that was really the beginning, starting to strike for every Friday and also joining other activists in reaching out to schools and communities and raising awareness in these places.
Mhm. You strike for climate change not only in Uganda but in many countries. What have you learned along the way until now?
Well, I've realized that strikes are one thing. They are different in different parts of the world. And, in Uganda, for example, it was always, very hard for us to organize like big strikes. And that's why we started to go to schools, to organize within schools, to carry out climate education, reach out to communities. And in other, parts of the world, I would see these big strikes, these big marches, and it made me realize that, in different places, activism will come in different forms. And I think it's a place of appreciating that uh, if someone doesn't go to the streets, but then, they decide to hold a strike at home,
Mhm.
then you have to respect that. There is a reason, for that. There are times when I've been told, why do you call your strikes school strikes? You know, when you're not leaving school. And for me, that was a question of someone from a privileged, place to ask something like that, because you find that in certain parts of the world, it's not very easy to just walk out of school. You could be suspended. You could also be expelled. Many of us were in boarding schools. And even when you were in day school, the time you would get out of school is, when school is done in the evening. And also there is a value for education, and mainly because of how much parents, have to, how much work our parents do to ensure that we not only go to school, but that we stay in school and that we also finish school. So for me, like being in different places, it has made me really understand that activism will come in different forms and we have to appreciate that.
Thank you, Vanessa. Out of all, which of campaign, project, or conference related to climate change that really matters for you to the most until now?
I have a project that I do that really matters to me, and it's called the Vash Green Schools Project. And this project involves the installation of solar panels
Mhm.
and clean cooking stoves in schools in Uganda. This is a project that I started in 2019 to, bring basic access to electricity in schools and also to bring clean cooking stoves that reduce on the consumption of firewood in the schools. And also it has been, a place of climate education, creating awareness and encouraging students and teachers, to be stewards of environmental protection. And when I think about how the project started with one school and how now we've reached, um, 51 schools, impacting about 20,000 children in Uganda, I think that is one of the things that, you know, that, the things that bring joy to my heart, and the things that make me appreciate the power of people coming together and supporting each other, supporting, a campaign, or supporting this project, and, transforming this world, with those small actions. I think for me, that is one of the things that really matter most to me right now.
Thank you, Vanessa. Do you feel better about change since you became an activist?
Well, I mean, the thing that really brought me in activism was, this place of feeling like there is a disaster that is happening and it needs to be addressed, and people's lives are being impacted, communities are being destroyed because of climate disasters. So it was a place of that urgency that we need action now. But then when I started, I think I just thought that action, the action that we want would come immediately. So again, that follows with the different disappointments and frustrations and even burnout, whereby, you feel like you're not doing enough to get the action that is needed from the leaders. So you work so much, to create awareness. You do daily strikes, you do different things in order to raise awareness, and in the end you experience burnout. For many people, they experience, this eco anxiety, because there is just this feeling of urgency, and then the frustration of inaction. So yes, that that comes along, in activism. But one of the things that really make me or give me the strength in activism is knowing that I am not working alone. I am working, with different activists. So I would say that ever since, I became an activist, I feel, better about what our planet can become, what our planet should become. Because I know it's not just me, it's millions of people, from different parts of the world working together. It's in that you realize that those different actions, those different campaigns that are happening in different parts of the world, when we put them together, we realize how much transformation that we are making. So yes, with the beginning, there's this urgency, and then I start to feel frustrated because I thought the action would come immediately. But then I learned that, when we are working in community, the power is with the people, and therein we'll find, transformation and change. So I would say that I feel better that I studied activism, and I know that this world will be, what we imagine it to be.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now, when we are talking about gender equality, what actions are most needed to advance the gender equality in the context of climate action?
Well, one of the things is girls' education. The other is women empowerment. We know that women are on the front lines, women and girls, they are on the front lines of the climate crisis, but they are also on the front lines of the fight for, climate justice. Project Drawdown lists 100 things that we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emission, and often ranked among the, top 10 solutions to tackle that. It's education, and therein is girls' education, therein is women empowerment. As things that we can do to build, resilience of individuals, resilience of communities, resilience of our countries, as things that we can do to reduce the inequalities that women and girls, already face in our communities, and the things that we can do to reduce greenhouse gas, emissions all at the same time. So for me, one of the things that needs to be done is to educate more girls, and not even more girls, ensure that every girl, goes to school and is educated, and every woman is empowered, because with this, that's how we drive to, women leadership as well, in the places where decisions about our planet are being made. I think that it's important to have women leadership in climate spaces as well, because when look at many people watch football, and if a team plays half of its members, most likely it would lose. And women and girls are more than half of the world's population. So if decisions are being made without women and girls, then um, most likely that those decisions won't amount to good. So we need women and girls in rooms where decisions about our planet are being made.
Thank you, Vanessa. For African women, how important is it for the voices of African women to be heard in the climate change conversation?
Well, for African women, I'm going to speak from the perspective of, mothers, I should say. And this really comes from a personal story. And it's been of recent that I've been thinking about how, we've lived our lives, in very sustainable ways, even when we didn't have a name for it. And it made me realize that right now there's just a name to it, but actually many families, within Uganda, within Africa, within the global south, they have actually been living, in the most sustainable ways possible. And I could give an example of, myself growing up, just those little things, where you had lunch, and if you didn't finish the food, my mother would tell you have to keep it and then uh, warm it later and have it for dinner or for supper. I think for me, I didn't know what that was. Probably she didn't have, a term for it as well, but she just knew that it was not good to waste food. And that is, I've just grown up with that you don't waste food. And we know how, food as well is very critical in the conversations of environmental protection. Excuse me. It's those things of, realizing that your parents would, the time you would get a new cloth would be um, maybe for Christmas at the end of the year. And now that I think about it, I realize how sustainable that was. And when you think about it in the aspect of how, fast fashion is causing so much damage to the environment, and how, people are consuming and buying, more than they need, and buying according to trends, according to, what is, I don't know, stylish at that point. So you realize how much fast fashion is, causing a lot of harm to the planet, but not just to the planet, but also, exacerbating the exploitation of uh, the people who make our clothes. And when I look at how I grew up, it was, we were always excited that we would get a new clothes, at the end of the year. So you had enough clothes. And when you look at some of the statistics, they show that currently you know, we have enough clothes for this generation, for around 5 generations. There is enough cloth, but then we still seeing more production. So for me, those are things that I learned from my mother, but I just didn't know that they were they had anything to do with sustainability. We didn't have a term for it. That's why I think that it's really important to have, African women in the spaces of climate, conversation, because climate change conversation, because they were already stewards of environmental protection, even without having, the word for it. We need the women, we need our mothers, we need our grandmothers, we need them in these places, because I think they carry a wisdom that we all need to learn uh, from. And, again, it makes me think about indigenous women and how it's just important to have these voices, these experiences, these wisdoms in these places, where decisions about our planet are being made.
Vanessa, thank you for sharing your personal story. I truly appreciate it. Truly appreciate it. You mentioned about fast fashion, and then you also mentioned about loss and damage. What does loss and damage look like to a young Ugandan woman?
Well, I mean, for loss and damage, we know it's happening right now. There is a need for adaptation, but where adaptation cannot help, that is when loss and damage comes in. And that's why it's important to address loss and damage. As climate impacts increase, loss and damage as well increases. And you realize that, for, let me say, the children in the Horn of Africa that are on the brink of starvation because of the drought that is happening there, they cannot adapt to starvation. You can't adapt to extinction. You can't adapt to, the loss of your, your culture, or the loss of your identity, or, the loss of that place you call home. So there is a lot of, conversation on adaptation, but where adaptation cannot help, that is where loss and damage comes in. And it's important to address loss and damage, the need for loss and damage finance. We know that the fund was established at COP27 last year, but now it's still an empty basket. We need money for the people that are on the front lines of this crisis. We need finance that is new, finance that is, that can be able to reach communities that are on the front lines. And also we need to double up on adaptation, adaptation finance, because if there is no adaptation finance, there's going to be more loss and damage. So it's really understanding that as we address loss and damage, we should address adaptation, and we should address mitigation as well.
Thanks, Vanessa. So inspiring. And you wrote a book named A Bigger Picture. Would you like to tell us more about it and what inspired you to write it?
Yes. So I wrote A Bigger Picture. Honestly, I didn't have like a specific inspiration for it. It wasn't my initial, I wouldn't say this inspired me, because it wasn't my initial thought to actually write a book. But I was approached by, someone who said that I could actually write a book, and they believed that I could write a book and I would raise awareness about climate change um, through writing a book. So really the inspiration came from that person. And that's when I started to think about, okay, what if I was to write a book, then what would I write about? The different topics and things to highlight. And in the end, I managed to write a book with this, with support from different people, because in that book you will find stories and experiences of different, you know, activists across Africa and also across the world, because I think that, it was important for me to not only tell my story, but also highlight the stories of those that are, on the front lines of the fight for climate justice. I believe every activist has a story to tell, and every story has a solution to give, and every solution has a life to change. So, that is what A Bigger Picture is really about: the different stories, the impacts of climate change in Uganda, across Africa, and what needs, to be done, and what we can all do, individually, how the actions we can take. Because it's one thing to say, okay, the climate crisis is here, but what can I do now? And yeah, that A Bigger Picture really helps, someone know what they can do, what actions they can take, as a beginning, or as a start, in order to address climate change.
Awesome, Vanessa. Vanessa, we are wondering when and where were you when you were in the lowest point of your life?
Well, I mean, it's very hard to say, like, to figure out what was the lowest point, because I mean, life always comes with, points where, it doesn't feel the best as it should. So it's really hard to say this was the lowest point of my life. But what I can say is that in every point, that felt low, in every point where I felt the weakest, I think, therein I found the strength to come out, the strength to do even better, the strength to even speak louder. So what I can, really talk about the lowest points, I may not have a specific one, but it's more of, I mean, it's more of how I come out, of those situations or those points. And I'm just grateful that in every point that comes, because I think that is just how life is. It always brings, um, you know, the low points. And what I've done with those low points is to even, become a better version, of myself, and, become a better activist, or become a better friend, or become, I just look at those moments as opportunities for me to become the best that I can. So I try not to let them, you know,
Mhm.
yeah, I try not to let them push me even lower. Yeah.
Thank you, Vanessa. Vanessa, what's your future goals as a climate activist and in your professional career?
Well, for now, yes, continuing with the Vash Green Schools Project and reaching as many schools as possible. And I'm also thinking about going to school, um, still figuring out which course that I would do, but I'm thinking about going to school, hopefully very soon. But yeah, and maybe, that will really help, in knowing the kind of professional career that I, would love to eventually take. Because like I said, I did business administration, in a university. Now I'm doing work related to environment, and many times people don't see how, you know how, it works out for me to have been a business student and then uh, be working on environmental issues. I mean, I also sometimes don't have an explanation for that, but I think that I think that sometimes, these things are maybe callings or purposes or responsibilities from God, and you just don't know, and you just find yourself being led um, by the spirit to do certain things. So even me, sometimes I can't explain how I went from being a business student to being a climate activist. So again, even with what is coming ahead, I'm just expectant for what I'll be able to do and who I'll be able to work with. But in the end, to make this world a better place and to transform the lives of different people across the world.
We wish all the best for your future goals, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Vanessa, what would be your message for young people about climate change?
Well, I mean, many times, climate change seems complicated for all of us, and we don't know where to start. We don't know what to do. We don't know, the frustrations, the frustrations that we feel sometimes. We don't know exactly what we need to do. And honestly, what I would say is just finding a group that is already doing something. You don't need to start alone. you can find a group that you can work with. It can be in your community, it can be, in your country, to just be a part of the fight. You don't need to start alone because it can be overwhelming sometimes and it can be complicated as well. And then really the other thing is to any young person and even anyone else who may want to do something about climate or the environment and they don't have anything to inspire them. I would say something that I learned from uh, the late Wangari Maathai, and it's more of just go, you know, look at a bird and listen to that bird, and when you listen to that bird and see it, may that give you the inspiration to want to see that bird protected. Because now when you see that bird, you think about its home, you think about its habitat, and in the end it leads you to larger issues of environmental protection. Like, okay, now we have to protect this tree, now we have to protect this forest, or we have to protect this place this bird calls home. So it's really those small things that can actually give us inspiration to just see a bird and wonder, how, how this bird would be able to survive without its habitat, and then saying, okay, I need to do something about it. And as you do it for the bird, you realize that in the end, you're doing it for humanity as well, because everything is so connected.
Inspiring message. Last but not least, Vanessa, what makes you you?
Well, what makes me me?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I would say it's my identity in God, honestly. I don't think I would be myself without God. And many people know that I am a born again Christian. And yeah, I believe in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. So for me, that is the source, or that is the place of identity. And I think that is what makes me me. I think it's my foundation, it's my rock, and it's just that place where my life starts. And I think it's where my life thrives as well. So I would say that's what makes me me.
Thank you, Vanessa. This is such a pleasure. Thank you again, Vanessa, for sharing your inspiring story. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good. It's great chatting with you as well.
Mhm. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Let's collaborate to make this world into a better place. I'm Gulo from Jadi PNS. Thank you and see you again.